The rifle rose slow in the dark, rain hammering the roof like war drums. She didn't beg. She just stared down the barrel with eyes that had run out of fear. The cowboy said nothing, but then, "Papa, don't let her go." That voice, his son's. And suddenly, the choice wasn't just between law and outlaw, it was between the man he'd become and the father he swore he'd never fail again. Now the barn's hiding more than a bruised fugitive. It's hiding the last piece of his soul he thought was dead. The rain fell hard and cold, drumming against the warped tin roof like the warning beat of distant war drums. In the barn's dim light, broken only by the flicker of a hanging lantern swaying gently from a rafter, every shadow seemed sharper, every sound louder. A breath, a boot step, the soft metallic whisper of a rifle being drawn to a ready aim. The cowboy moved slow, deliberate. The muzzle of his Winchester lifted like judgment itself, steady as a stone pillar. He didn't blink. His face, carved from silence and weather, gave nothing away. His hat brim dripped rain onto the packed earth floor, the water mixing with the mud and the blood already soaked into it. A shape cowered in the corner, human, hunched, eyes wide. Before we reveal what made a silent cowboy choose a fugitive over fear, why the boy's quiet truth shook the law to its knees, and how a torn telegram lit the fire that burned corruption bare, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These aren't just stories, they're buried truths, pulled from dust and conscience, where justice was whispered before it was ever shouted. Your support helps us bring them back. Every click lets us ride further, stand firmer, and speak for those history tried to forget. Thank you. A girl. No, a woman. Cloaked in a tattered shawl, her ribs showed through her dress when the lantern swung her way. Dirt streaked her cheeks. She didn't speak, didn't beg. Just stared down the barrel of her ending. A gust of wind slammed the barn door against its hinges. The lantern shivered, the shadows shifted. Behind him, a small voice broke through the thunder like a thread of raw string pulled tight. "Papa, please, don't let her go." The cowboy flinched barely, but it was enough. His finger paused on the trigger. The boy stood behind him barefoot, shirt damp, clutching the wooden horse his father carved 2 winters ago. His voice was shaking, but his eyes held something older than his years. He wasn't pleading like a child. He was asking like a witness. The woman gasped a small, accidental sound, and it filled the barn like a gunshot. The cowboy's aim dipped, slightly. Not much. Enough. He spoke, finally, his voice low and cracked like a dry creek bed. "She come here?" The woman's head nodded, slow. Rainwater clung to the frayed tips of her hair. "You runnin'?" Another nod. Then, after a beat too long, "Yes." The rifle stayed in his grip, the iron weight of it unchanged. But his stance was different now, less executioner, more something else. His eyes narrowed, not in cruelty, but in calculation. Something behind them was moving, stirring where nothing had stirred in years. "She hurt anyone?" His voice was asking the boy now, not the woman. "No, Papa, she's scared." "She's not one of them?" The boy looked to the woman, then back. "She helped me. That day, at the river." The cowboy stiffened. Time slipped sideways. A buried image, his boy, coughing up river water, a shadow vanishing into the trees. He'd never known who pulled him out. Only that someone had. The barn held its breath. Outside, the storm broke again, wind howling like wolves over the hills. But inside, something quiet cracked. The rifle lowered, slowly, not dropped. Not surrendered. Just not pointed anymore. The woman let out a sound, half sob, half exhale. The boy stepped forward, took her hand. And the cowboy, the man who hadn't let anyone stay under his roof since the war ended, spoke with finality. "She stays." The lantern flickered. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled. And this time, he didn't flinch. The sky was still dark when the cowboy rose. No clock told him the time, he didn't need one. He knew morning by the feel of the air, by how the wind settled low in the hollows, and how the dew hadn't yet lifted from the grass. The kind of silence that sits heavy on the land. He moved like a man built from the terrain, deliberate, weather-worn, quiet. He lit the stove with practiced ease. The match hissed, the fire caught. One tin cup of coffee, black as midnight, steam rising like a signal only ghosts could read. Outside, the dirt stretched wide and empty, the land too stubborn for most crops, but just enough to graze cattle if you didn't ask too much from it. The barn loomed out past the house, old, stubborn, standing more from habit than structure. He stepped into his boots, grabbed his coat, and left without a word. His son, a small figure curled under a quilt, stirred but didn't rise. The carved horse he'd named Jonah lay beside him, worn smooth from worry. The cowboy crossed the yard. His boots made no sound on the earth. The wind had no teeth, yet it was calm, with a chill that hinted at storm later. He opened the barn door with a slow pull, out of habit. No reason to rush what's never in a hurry. The scent of old straw and oiled leather greeted him. The horses stirred, snorted, blinked at him with indifferent eyes. He moved to the feed sacks. Routine. Hands worked without thought. Then a sound, small, muffled. He paused, turned. Another rustle. Too soft for a raccoon, too heavy for a cat. It came from the hay pile in the far corner, the one untouched since last season. He stared at it. No movement now, just stillness. Like the barn was holding its breath. He stepped forward slowly, one hand resting on the handle of the knife at his belt, the other steadying his breath. He crouched, reached, and pulled back a layer of hay. Eyes, wide, rimmed red, staring up at him with the wild fear of an animal cornered. A woman. Her cheek was split, brow swollen. Dirt streaked her collarbones. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, barely above the breeze, she whispered, "Please, don't scream." He didn't. He didn't even flinch. She tried to rise, but her arm failed her. She winced. He saw the bruise on her wrist blackened, ringed like rope or iron. Not fresh, but not old either. Her other hand clutched the hem of her dress, a pathetic shield. "Don't tell them I'm here," she rasped. "They'll find me." His face didn't change, not much did anymore. But he didn't draw the knife, either. "You runnin' from law?" he asked. "No, worse." The barn held its silence a moment longer. One of the horses pawed at the floor. The wind outside picked up slightly, brushing dust from the rafters. He exhaled through his nose, slow and hard. "You got a name?" "No." He nodded once. Just once. That was the agreement. Behind them, the farmhouse door creaked open. Small footsteps pattered across the dirt. "Papa?" the boy's voice called out. The cowboy turned his head just slightly and replied without looking back. "Just the wind, son. Go on inside." The footsteps faded. When he turned back, the woman was crying but without sound, like someone who'd had to learn not to make noise when it hurt. He didn't speak again. Just threw a blanket from the saddle rack toward her and walked back toward the door. He didn't latch it when he left. The morning sun broke through the clouds, slow and reluctant, casting pale light across the hills like it, too, was unsure whether it ought to bear witness. The cowboy crouched in the corner of the barn, his back to the stall, holding a metal basin of water warmed by the stove and carried carefully across the yard. His hands, thick and calloused, moved with surprising care as he dabbed a rag against the gash beneath her hairline. She didn't flinch this time, just stared at the beams above her head, eyes following the spider that moved across the rafters like it was free, and she was not. He didn't ask again who had done it. She hadn't answered the first time, and the brand on her wrist circle bisected with a crude H had said more than words could. He'd seen that mark before. Carried on the flank of a gelding years back, traded through rough hands, a horse that flinched at every touch. Same hands maybe, same cruelty, dressed different. She ate in silence, wolfing down the dry bread and boiled potatoes he brought with both urgency and shame. He poured her a second cup of water before he spoke. "They'll come lookin'," he said, "if they ain't already." Her voice was hoarse. "They always do." He nodded like that was confirmation of something he'd known deep down, something he hadn't wanted to name. Behind them, through a crack in the boards, the boy's shadow flickered past. He wasn't dumb. He'd noticed his father making extra food. Noticed how the dog slept outside the barn now, facing the door instead of the yard. That morning, he'd stood longer at the threshold, holding Jonah, his hand-carved horse, like it might tell him what grown-ups wouldn't. But he hadn't said a word. Not yet. Inside, the cowboy wrapped her wrist in linen. The brand was raw, blistered around the edges. Fresh enough that she must have torn free from whoever held her. Rope burns climbed her arms like vines. He didn't ask about those either. Some things didn't need asking. "I can't pay you," she said, voice low. "Ain't asked for pay." "Then why help me?" He paused, glanced at the beam above, the hook where a lantern used to hang. Empty now, just a nail and a memory. He didn't answer. But she studied him, eyes narrowed, not suspicious, curious, like maybe she'd seen men turn cruel before, but not many turn kind without needing a reason. It unnerved her more than violence would have. Mercy was harder to predict. That night, he took a bedroll to the barn. Said it was to keep the animals calm in the storm. But the boy watched from the window, and he knew that wasn't true. Knew because he heard the voices, hushed and close. Knew because he saw the lantern flicker again in the barn when it should have been dark. He waited until the cowboy came back in, late, boots caked in dust and mud. The boy sat at the table. "She's still out there, huh?" The cowboy looked at him long, then nodded. "She bad?" the boy asked. The cowboy poured a glass of water, sipped it slow. "Bad folks don't bleed runnin'," he said. The boy seemed to accept that. But he didn't go to bed. Not right away. Just sat with his horse in hand, watching the rain return. Watching his father turn the lamp down low, face drawn with a weight he didn't share. Outside, the wind whispered through the dust, curling under doors and between fence slats like it carried secrets. Inside, Mercy sat heavy, unspoken but not unseen. The sun was high when the dust appeared, just a thin line at first, smeared across the horizon like a smudge on a window. But he saw it before the others did. The cowboy stood at the edge of the corral, one hand resting on the fence post, his eyes squinting under the weight of noon light. Dust didn't rise like that unless someone was riding hard. And folks didn't ride hard unless they were chasing or running. By the time the riders crested the ridge, the woman was already in the barn. She'd seen the dust too. Her face had gone the color of raw flour, all blood vanished beneath the surface. She didn't cry or beg, just moved, fast, quiet, like she'd done it before. The boy gripped his father's sleeve as the first of the riders came into view, 6 of them, maybe 7, all in black dusters and hard hats. Rifles strapped lazy across their saddles but hands never far from them. At their center, unmistakable even from a distance, rode Sheriff Harlan Voss. Broad-chested, mouth like a knife's edge, eyes that never blinked when he aimed. His badge glinted in the sun like something earned, not pinned. The cowboy pulled his sleeve free gently, then turned toward the house. "Get inside," he said to the boy. "But now." The boy hesitated only a breath, then ran. Inside the barn, the woman huddled between sacks of grain, beneath a hanging tarp. Not perfect cover, nothing was. But she tucked herself small, the way prey does when it knows eyes are scanning for movement. She wrapped her branded wrist in the spare cloth he'd left and clenched her jaw. Her breath was shallow, controlled. The sound of hooves thundered into the yard like drums before a hanging. The cowboy stepped out to meet them. Harlan didn't dismount, neither did the others. The horses puffed and shifted. One of the deputies chewed something, slow and casual. "You seen anyone pass through?" Harlan asked. No greeting, no courtesy. The cowboy shook his head once. "Ain't seen much beyond fence line." "You'd remember this one," the sheriff said. "Woman, bruised up, might be bleeding, might be quiet." The cowboy's jaw tensed. "Ain't seen her." "You sure?" "Sure as the fence still stands." The sheriff glanced toward the barn. His eyes lingered. Inside, the woman squeezed her eyes shut, listened. Every hoof stomp felt like it was shaking the boards. Every shift of leather sounded like judgment. The boy stood at the window of the house, peeking from behind the curtain. He held Jonah, carved legs worn smooth, his fingers white from gripping too tight. "You mind if we look around?" the sheriff asked, voice even but loaded. "I do." Silence. "You sayin' no to the law?" Harlan asked. "I'm sayin' I ain't got time for you to trample through my feed with boots that ain't earned." A few of the riders chuckled, low and mean. But Harlan didn't smile. "You hiding something, Caleb?" The cowboy met his eyes, unblinking. "If I was, you'd already know." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Harlan spat into the dirt and tugged his reins. "We'll be back," he said. "Maybe by then you'll remember something," one of the deputies added. The riders turned as one, kicking up more dust than they brought. When the sound of hooves faded, the cowboy turned back toward the barn. The moment he opened the door, he found her still crouched, eyes wide, breath held like she hadn't dared exhale. "They gone?" she whispered. "For now." She let out the air in her lungs, finally. But he didn't let go of the door. He looked at her hard. The barn wasn't safe anymore. Not really. The ridge was burned into his mind now. How quickly they'd arrived, how slow they'd left. The noose was tightening. And they both knew it. By midday the next sun, the riders came back, not just a few this time, but more. 12 in total, their dust darkening the horizon like a storm front with boots. They moved in a line, silent and certain, cutting through the open plain with the cold precision of men, convinced they were doing God's work, or close enough. At their head rode Sheriff Harlan Voss, straight-backed and tight-lipped, his duster flaring behind him like a judge's robe. The cowboy saw them before they reached the yard. He was standing on the porch, sharpening his knife, not because it needed it, but because his hands needed something to do that wouldn't get someone killed. His boy sat on the top step behind him, legs tucked close, wooden horse in hand. The barn door remained closed, but the woman inside was awake, wide-eyed, crouched, listening to every hoofbeat like it might be her last. Harlan didn't dismount this time either. He stopped his horse 3 yards from the porch, boots still in the stirrups, eyes cold beneath the brim of his hat. "You've had time to think," he said, voice low and firm, like a stone dropped into a well. The cowboy looked up, slow. "I have. And I still ain't seen anyone." Harlan's lip twitched, almost a smile, but not kind. "This ain't about seeing, it's about doing right." "Right for who?" the cowboy asked, standing now. "For the law." The cowboy's jaw flexed, then stilled. "You think the law means justice?" "It is justice." "No," the cowboy said, stepping off the porch. "It's rules printed by men who ain't seen what you've done in the dark. And when those rules get twisted for profit, it ain't justice, it's just more muscle with a badge." The sheriff's hand drifted near his holster. "You accusing me of something? I ain't the one asking for confessions." The riders shifted behind Harlan. Saddles creaked, hands hovered near triggers. But the cowboy didn't blink. He walked to the middle of the yard, dust swirling around his boots. "I know what your men do with the ones they catch. I've heard the stories. Some ain't even stories. They're names. Graves with no markers. Girls sold twice before their bruises even faded. That brand on her wrist? I seen it on cattle too scared to drink." "She's a fugitive," Harlan said flatly. "She's a witness. She's a liar. She's alive." A pause. "She's dangerous," the sheriff added. The cowboy took a breath. "To who?" Silence. Then Harlan leaned forward in the saddle, eyes narrowing. "You think you're better than the law? I think the law's got a blind spot where men like you do their work." Behind him, the boy stepped forward, small but steady. His voice carried not loud, but clear. "She saved me." The sheriff turned his head slightly. "What?" The boy stood straighter. "She pulled me from the river. That day, I would have drowned." The sheriff glanced to the cowboy, who met his gaze without flinching. "You sure you want to throw away your place in this town for a stranger?" "I'm sure," the cowboy said, stepping between them and the barn, "that I owe the law nothing. And her something." A beat passed. No one moved. Then the sheriff tugged his reins, slowly. "We'll be back," he said. The cowboy nodded. "I'll be here." And just before Harlan turned his horse, his voice cut back across the dust. "Who gets to say what's right out here?" The cowboy didn't answer. Because everyone already had. The wind had turned mean by evening, thick with grit and smoke from someone's burn pile east of the ridge. The kind of wind that stung the eyes and whispered warnings no one wanted to hear out loud. The cowboy stood in the barn doorway, his silhouette framed against the dying light, hat low, jaw locked in a silence that was beginning to feel heavier than words. Inside, the woman sat with her back to a stall, legs folded, face drawn and pale. She hadn't eaten since morning. She hadn't asked for anything either. The boy stood a few feet behind his father, arms crossed over his chest like he was trying to hold something in. For 2 days, he had done what boys do: watched, listened, filled the cracks between adult silences with questions he never voiced. But now, something was rising in him, too big to be ignored. The cowboy didn't look back when he spoke. "They'll come again, with more." "I know," she said. Her voice was rough. Not scared, now resigned. "They'll burn this barn if they think I'm lying." The woman didn't respond. She only stared at the dirt between her knees, as if trying to memorize it. And then the boy stepped forward, voice cracking not from fear, but from the weight of what needed saying. "She saved me, Papa." The cowboy turned, slowly. The boy's hands gripped the wooden horse again, but this time it wasn't a toy, it was a tether. "At the river," he said, eyes bright with something fierce. "Last month, I slipped. Current was too fast. You were out in the north field. She pulled me out. I don't know how, but she did." The cowboy said nothing. Not at first. But behind his eyes, something shifted. A memory long sealed in dust cracked open. That day, the boy soaking wet, coughing, shaking. He hadn't been able to speak clearly for hours. Said someone helped, but never said who. Just pointed toward the tree line. A shadow vanishing into the pines. The woman looked up, her eyes wide now, her breath suddenly unsteady. "You didn't tell him," the cowboy said quietly, watching her. "I didn't want anything," she replied. "I just didn't want him to die." The boy stepped closer to her, then knelt. He didn't ask permission, just took her hand gently in his. "She didn't run," he said. "Not from me." Outside, the wind howled against the boards, rattling nails, tugging at loose slats like it was trying to peel the truth from the walls. The cowboy blinked slowly, then turned to the barn door. He didn't step out, not yet, just looked into the coming dark, like he could see the men already riding down through the trees. He wasn't hiding a fugitive anymore. That word didn't fit. Fugitive meant trouble, fugitive meant risk. But what she'd done without glory, without demand, had rewritten the ledger. Now she wasn't someone he sheltered out of pity. She was someone he owed. The balance had shifted. And so had he. He turned back to her. "You stay inside," he said, "no matter what happens." Then to the boy, "Get your coat. We'll need to stack the hay bales near the doors, make it harder to break through. You think they'll try? I think they're desperate. And desperate men don't ask twice." The boy didn't flinch. The woman reached out as if to stop them, but her hand fell short. Words failed her again. She wasn't used to being defended. The cowboy gave her one last look. It held no questions, just a promise. They would come as wolves. But now, he was standing guard over something worth bleeding for. By the time the sun had cleared the hilltops, the sound of hooves returned not in pairs, not in half-hearted passes, but in force. 20 men rode in across the dry plain, their silhouettes sharp against the rising heat shimmer. Riders in tight formation, eyes hidden beneath wide brims, rifles shouldered not for show. They moved with the authority of men who believed their cause was righteous because no one had ever dared tell them otherwise. At their head, again, was Sheriff Harlan Voss. But this time, he wasn't here to talk. The cowboy stood in the barnyard, arms crossed, the dust swirling at his boots. The boy stood beside him, holding Jonah tight against his chest. Inside the barn, the woman crouched in the shadows, breath slow but shallow. Her hand pressed to the doorframe like she was ready to run, though she knew there was nowhere left to go. Harlan didn't speak right away. He let the silence settle like ash, let the weight of numbers hang in the air. Then, with a dry voice that cracked from the sun, he said, "Last chance, Caleb." The cowboy's jaw flexed, but he didn't answer. "I ain't here for a standoff," the sheriff continued. "I'm here to uphold order. You hand her over, this ends clean. You don't." He flicked his reins toward a deputy who rode up beside him with a bundle of pitch-soaked cloth and a jug of kerosene. "I'll burn that barn down with her in it." The cowboy's eyes narrowed. "And if she's innocent?" Harlan's face twisted. "That's not your place to decide." "I ain't deciding," the cowboy said. "I'm remembering." There was a shifting behind them. Boots on hard earth. A figure emerged from the eastern fence line, Old Man Tiller, hobbling with a shotgun slung over his back. Another voice called out behind the sheriff's men. A younger farmer, coat still dusted with hay, rode up slow on a mule, dismounted, and stood behind the cowboy without a word. Then another. And another. A pair of brothers, the Reed boys, known more for drinking than fighting, showed up on foot, rifles across their backs and hard looks on their faces. A woman in a calico dress arrived with a shovel and a stare that cut clean through leather. Drifters, farmers, ranchers. A former outlaw who owed the cowboy his life after being pulled from a gorge in a storm. They came quiet, but they came. They stood not because they believed the woman's story in full, they didn't know it, but because they'd all known what it felt like to be judged by men who never asked for the truth. The wind blew harder now, curling dust into the space between the two sides like a line drawn by nature itself. Harlan's gaze moved across the gathering. His voice, when it came, was colder. "You planning to start a war, Caleb?" "No," the cowboy said. "I'm planning to finish one." A long pause. Then the boy stepped forward, small boots crunching into the dry ground. He looked up at the sheriff. "She saved me." The words rang out louder than a gunshot. The sheriff looked at the boy, then at the crowd behind the cowboy, men and women who'd known his silence for years, who'd never once heard him ask for help. And now they stood for him like his silence had always meant something sacred. Harlan didn't give the signal. Not yet. But his hand hovered over the torch, just long enough for everyone to see. Then the cowboy stepped forward. Slow, sure. He bent down, picked up a rock, and dragged a line through the dust between them all. "She doesn't cross this," he said, "and neither do you." No one moved, but everything had changed. The fire wasn't in the torch. It was already burning in every man who now knew this wasn't about one woman hiding in a barn. It was about who got to decide what justice looked like when the smoke cleared. The dust had barely settled when the barn door creaked open. The wind caught it first, flaring it wide like a curtain pulled back on a final act. All eyes turned. Every boot on the ground shifted slightly, men reaching half instinctively toward holsters, breath hitching like the scene might finally ignite. But no weapon appeared. Just the woman, bruised but standing, her shoulders square, eyes scanning the crowd as if daring anyone to look away. She stepped into the daylight slowly, as if her legs had only just remembered how to carry her. The sun caught the edge of her face, and the split across her cheekbone bloomed fresh again. In her right hand, clenched tight, was a small folded scrap of paper, creased and crumpled from days of hiding. The cowboy turned to her, not with surprise. He knew she wouldn't stay hidden forever, but with a flicker of something older, respect. The woman stopped just behind the line the cowboy had drawn in the dirt. She looked not at him, but past him, directly at Harlan Voss, sitting high in his saddle like a judge above a gallows. "You want truth?" she said, voice raw but steady. "Here it is." She unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. A torn telegram, yellowed and smeared, the ink barely legible. 10 names, she said. 10 girls. Missing between Dry Creek and Carson Gulch. Not runaways, not thieves. Taken, sold, buried. My sister's name is third on the list. She held it out, but no one moved to take it. They worked out of holding cells. Outposts. Took girls in under false warrants. Some of them never made it to trial. Some were never meant to. That brand you're all pretending not to see? She raised her wrist, unwrapping the linen. It's not from a jail, it's from a buyer. And I escaped before my turn came. A silence took hold of the yard, the kind that bends the world before it breaks it. The men behind Harlan shifted, eyes darting, hands falling away from their weapons. One of them, young, maybe 20, stepped his horse back a pace, then looked to the sheriff. "You knew," the woman said. "You gave them cover, took your cut. Didn't think anyone'd live to tell it." The crowd rippled. The woman's voice rose with the wind. "You call this justice? You burn barns and break bones, but you never once looked for the girls that went missing under your watch." She looked at the faces around her. Some she recognized, others not. But they were listening now, really listening. And she could see it in their eyes, truth landing like weight on their chests. The deputy to Harlan's left, broad-shouldered, slow to speak, glanced down at his reins. His grip loosened. Then he dismounted, quiet, walked to the center, took the telegram from her hand. "Read it." His jaw locked. He looked at the sheriff. "You said none of this was true." Harlan's face didn't change, but his knuckles were white on the reins. "I said what needed saying." "No," the deputy replied. "You said what kept you clean." He turned to the others. "I vouched for him. That's on me. But I won't ride for this." One by one, others followed. Riders dismounted. Farmers stepped closer to the line. The crowd was no longer on the edge. It had crossed. Harlan's voice cracked through the tension. "She's a fugitive." "She's a witness," the cowboy said, stepping beside her. "And you're finished." The sheriff's eyes flicked from face to face. He saw no guns raised, but no backs turned either. No one willing to ride with him. No one willing to burn what he'd already scorched. He turned his horse without a word, kicked it hard, and rode into the dust alone. The judgment hadn't come from bullets. It had come from the truth, spoken aloud, and from the silence that followed, a silence that said, "Finally, enough." The barn door swung open on a morning softer than most. The wind had lost its bite, and the sky held a kind of hush that only came after storms had passed. like the land itself was catching its breath. The woman stood in the threshold, saddlebag slung across her shoulder, boots dusted from the walk to town and back. Her face was still marked by what had happened. Faint bruises faded yellow and green, but her eyes no longer darted like prey. She met the cowboy's gaze with calm, chin high, hands steady. The horse waited just beyond the fence, brushed and saddled. A gift, if anyone had asked, but no one had. He hadn't said it out loud, just tied the reins where she'd find them. She stepped toward him, and the boy who stood at his side. The boy looked taller somehow, older. He held Jonah in one hand, the wood worn smooth as riverstone now, edges dulled from worry and from clutching tight in the long nights when no one had spoken above a whisper. "You're sure you want to go east?" the cowboy asked. She nodded. "There's a woman in Carson Gulch. Runs a place that hides women like me. I'll be safe there. And I'll make sure they hear the names." He didn't ask what she meant. She didn't need to explain. She turned to the boy, knelt low, looked him square in the eye. "You keep listening, all right? That's what saved me." The boy nodded, quiet but sure. Then stepped forward and hugged her without asking. The cowboy helped her onto the horse. When she looked back at him, there was something in her expression he hadn't seen before, something like peace. "Thank you," she said. He tipped his hat. "You earned it." Then she rode east, slow at first, then faster as the road opened. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. The barn stood quiet, no longer hiding anything but the usual. Hay, tools, the smell of leather and earth. The town spoke her name less with each day, not because it was forgotten, but because it had been settled. There'd been no trial, no hanging, no shootout. But a kind of justice had planted itself deeper than all that. Folks who once looked the other way now looked harder, asked more, trusted slower. One morning, the cowboy led his son out past the barn to the small patch of land that hadn't yet taken to seed. The sun was just warming the soil. The boy carried a burlap sack under his arm. "Why now?" he asked. The cowboy knelt beside him, hands in the dirt. "Because this is the right time." "For planting?" "For starting something new." They worked in silence for a while, the good kind. The boy made rows with a stick, his father dropping seeds, covering them with his palms like he was laying something to rest and bringing it back in the same breath. "Will they grow?" the boy asked. "If we watch 'em, water 'em, wait." "And if they don't?" The cowboy looked toward the horizon, the same one she'd disappeared into weeks ago. "Then we try again." He paused, then added, "We plant things not just for food, but to remember what mercy looks like, to remind ourselves what we stood for when it counted." The boy nodded. He didn't ask more. The sky stretched wide above them. The wind was just a whisper now, no longer a warning. Out here, silence could bury truth. Or guard it. Until it bloomed. What would you risk to shelter someone the world condemned?